Bom, agora gostaria de ir para a nossa última discussão.
Now, I would like to go over to our last discussion of the day, which is for sure going to be very interesting. I'm going to invite Professor Dr. Gonzalo Vecina to be the moderator of the last battle, how to ban COVID-19. Professor Gonzalo was the first president of Anvisa. He had his fingerprint very well put there. And today he's going to be great to help us evolve in this initiative. He's a doctor, he works with sanitation, he participated as superintendent in Hospital Sírio-Libanês in São Paulo City Hall as responsible for sanitation, and he is our guru in many aspects. Dr. Gonzalo, please, you have the floor. I would just observe that unfortunately Dr. Cipriano Maia will not be able to join us in this discussion because he has a very serious flu, congestion, cough, so he couldn't participate. So he's very sorry. He said good luck to us all. And Dr. Gonzalo, you have the floor. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, saying hello to Carlos as well, and all of our colleagues who are here with us to discuss what certainly will not be the last battle, because the last battle, unfortunately, we can't anticipate in our horizon. It's yet another battle, and we're certainly not going to banish COVID-19. We're going to try to maintain COVID-19 in a coexistence point. In any way, I thought the discussion was very interesting about the perspectives to expand testing and seeing that there are no consensus. There's no consensus, and that's what we are also going to see in our panel starting now. Since we have 1 hour, it's something very quick. Let's call our 5 panelists, since the CONAS representative will not be present. And I will ask our panelists to be able to stay within 10 minutes so that we have a few minutes left for us to have our discussion among us. So we're going to have the discussion on the sequence that is here on our program. So first, the vision of Health Ministry, Anvisa's view, industry view, lab view, and pharma view. Let's start with the vision from Health Ministry with Dr. Carolina Valero. She is the representative of the Secretary of Fighting COVID in the Health Ministry. Please, Dr. Carolina, go ahead. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I'm representing our secretary, Dr. Rosana. Due to her schedule, she couldn't be here. And today, for our debate, I'm going to give you a retrospective view on what the Health Ministry has thought and has done in relation to COVID over the past 2 years. And what we propose now, even with actions, are after COVID as well. Okay, so let's get started. Ever since the pandemic started, the Health Ministry, excuse me, Dr. Carolini, it's not in presentation mode. I don't know if you can change it. Just a moment. Otherwise, you can do it this way. It's okay. Okay. So at the beginning, February 2020, we had the Operations Center for Health and Emergency, which is COE, COE, and it is involved in all secretariats in the health ministry, considering the strategies for how we could do not even planning, but what was our action at that moment when the situation demanded more precision. After that, since COVID was more and more going like that, and acquisition of equipments, immunizers, there was a need to have a better structure and a broader structure for our COEs. So that was published in May 2021. And that is the extraordinary secretary to face COVID-19, which is CCOVID. CCOVID was then responsible for a PNO, which is the National Plan of Operationalization of Vaccines Against COVID-19, PNO. It was developed throughout this time, all the strategic actions that were discussed deliberately. It was constituted, and it was a part of this document, which we published and changed every 15 days, so every 2 weeks. And also about the coordination of CCOVID, we instituted the Technical Chamber in Accessory and Immunization, which is SECAI COVID. So about the PNO, inside that, it's in the contingency plan that the health ministry has prepared. Thinking of this guidance, the organization of the most urgent responses, and always thinking of guiding states and municipalities in facing COVID. So PNO actually brings the guidelines for immunization strategies, the priority groups. We started at the beginning, and we had to have these divisions for the distribution of immunizers, working with the vaccine scheme. So everything that is a strategic action facing COVID is actually a part of the National Operationalization Plan, which is this document, which is being updated constantly. Dr. Carolini, if you could just move the slides, because we're still on slide number 3. About the technical chamber, how did we institute the technical chamber? The technical chamber already existed. And considering CETAI COVID specifically, CECOVID actually did a publication inviting specialists, researchers, CONASEMS, OPAS itself. And they were invited to be in this technical chamber and to have these decisions done, the analysis, everything related to immunization against COVID-19. Let's move on to the next slide. The process inside CETAI. We have this discussion, and it was a discussion actually until the week before last. We were discussing this from August until last week. We were discussing this weekly. So we would bring these discussions to CETAI, these discussions that are in the priority groups, the vaccines, vaccination by age, the immunocompromised people, pregnant women, people who are traveling, and we do have a high demand about the requirements for travelers who are going to other countries, healthcare professionals, the epidemiology vigilance as well. This is all discussed in CEPI, and they're always analyzed by the components based on what everything we have in terms of scientific evidence and data. It's not always that we have the scientific evidence in decision making, but we always work with data to be able to bring this deliberation, the strategies on how the health ministry is going to, how it's going to be able to reach these actions in the most serious way possible. And from this moment, we have the technical recommendations, which are transmitted to management for the decision making, because that wasn't deliberate. And finally, the operations itself, which is on the coordination of CBDL, and also the entire deliberation of technical notes that and everything that the ministry is launching. We always have the publication and the inclusion in our P&O. Next one. About the topics that CETAI has been discussing. In this period, we had 23 ordinary and extraordinary meetings. From March 2022, we started having CETAI COVID meetings every 2 weeks so that we can have another concern in the ministry, which are the other vaccines. So now weekly we have PNI being discussed on CETAI, and on the other one we have CETAI COVID. So we're already working with the other vaccines as well and the strategies.
I brought here for you so you can have an idea the timeline of these actions for the vaccine coverage, how it happened. In the beginning of the campaign in January of 21st, we started working with strategies regarding distribution for priority groups. In July of 2021, we concluded the first dose for this priority group. In August, we had the campaign for people over 18, and September, the boost shot, and then the campaign from the ages from 12 to 17 years old. In November, we had the other dose for people over 18. In December, again, we have the booster shot. January of 2022, we have the public consultation considering to provide the vaccine for children from 5 to 11 years old. In February, conclude the first dose. When I think about conclusion, it is about the distribution. That's the role of the ministry regarding the states and municipalities. So we have finished the first dose, and the other dose, the booster shot from people that were from 12 to 17, always updating. For each dose of this, we update the campaign again. You were in February with this edition, and in March, the second dose for the population over 80 years old, and the additional dose for the travelers. About the strategies, thinking about COVID, we have actions in the ministry with all the secretariats here about the primary care, that we have this concern about post-COVID, not only something that we have about the issues regarding the long COVID, but the things that we didn't do during the pandemic, that we know that in some areas we had a high demand So we work now with this planning of which actions, where we're going to start in these actions. Also, in the surveillance health area, we are working with the genomic surveillance and the testing.
Trabalhamos com a questão da orientação quanto às medidas não
And we also work with the orientation that change accords to the context. Actually, all these actions are dynamic. They're changing a lot depending on our context and about the epidemiology. And also we work with actions in education that since the beginning, we needed to have a lot of actions related to the education of the professional, but also we think about these actions regarding post-COVID. I think that what we have in the national plan regarding testing is to have diagnosis to provide care. So we think about all the strategies of testing, that these actions that are there will be published and recorded in a document. And the action plan, we work now about the Omicron variant. That's the more recent action from the ministry. Thinking about that, we have the prevention also. About the vaccination. So we have this 484 million doses. So we have this 402 million between the 2 and the first dose. I hope that I'm not over my time too much. Just a little bit. Thank you. Just one question. Just one question for you so we can move on. What is the position of the Ministry of Health regarding the self-test? So then we can have a discussion with the other participants. About the self-test, it was discussed here. We have the Health Surveillance Agency, and the idea that we're working with is something favorable because we are working in how we could monitor the self-test, considering the epidemiological point of view to have these results. Okay, thank you very much. So now let's have the other views. So now I would like to invite Dr. Leandro Rodrigues Pereira from the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency, Anvisa. So please, Dr. Leandro, 10 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Gonzalo. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you and congratulations, Ladiv, for the organization of this event, an important event that's important to discuss about testing, especially about the future. If you are in a migration process, an initial process of pandemic for another moment, I think that the maintenance of the testing is fundamental to monitor all the things related to COVID in Brazil. So they need to operate with the quality principles and safety, and of course are an essential part of the health system, and a strong health system, and it will reflect in the public health. It's fundamental to identify cases, close contacts, to make the isolation possible, and work in a direct way in the transmission chain with vaccination, with the non-pharmacological uses as the use of masks are being part of of this package of things, not only Brazil and the entire world. So we'll separate three things, three moments regarding the visa action in this process, and also bring an input of what we expect for the future. The first moment, it happened in the beginning of the pandemic, when we had the need to have the first diagnosis test for COVID. New disease, we didn't have any product for diagnosis in the country, few products in the world, and we needed to do this fast to have access to these products. From reliance principles, the agency started working in a way to be more flexible with the regulations, trying to get stronger in the post-market, making these products possible to come to the market in the right way. This was the first moment that it was a similar situation with other medical devices as masks, respiratory pumps, and we had some flexibilization with the good practice of manufacturing. So this was an implementation about things that we have discussed before, about the reliance. This is part of the regulatory part of Anvisa. So it was a catalyst thing for this process. So what we have been designing for the future happened in a faster way. With that, we were able to receive more than 1,000 registers for COVID tests. We approved 758 tests that are approved, and we failed 209 requests for tests. So with this, flexibilization was important to broaden the offering of products in the market and make it possible to have suitable conditions for the testing in Brazil. This was the first action from Anvisa. This was adopted, and I see that was quite successful. Checking this, and we see that this reliance initiative about using the assessment of other authorities, it's something new. There's a project from Anvisa that's coordinated by our area. So we can use that for all the areas of the agency. And we go deeper in the discussion when we have the main forum of the regulators, a project that aims to have a unique review for this registration. So one group would reveal the regulation of the products. We can have diagnosed tests, and these products will be sold in the countries. It comes from an initial reliance project, that's the MDSAC program. That's an sanitation inspection that we had in the IMDRF. That's really successful. I see this for the future, that we will move forward in a fast pace. The second moment that I see from the sanitation action from Anvisa, it was the testing aspect, was when Anvisa saw that was necessary to broaden the places to provide service, the sites. So we had labs that were full, that they couldn't handle with this need. So we had the opportunity to broaden the mechanism of testing to the pharmacies. So we provide more access, and the population got closer to the resources that they needed and use the measures to control dissemination. And we were careful to preserve the safety and also keeping the interpretation of the results by health professionals, making sure that the notification of the results were done in the control health system. So at that moment, we didn't have a self-testing policy. the regulation from Anvisa, it brings that the self-testing process requires a public policy to address what is the way to handle the patient and how notify these cases. So as this was not part of the national public policy, we didn't address this, but certainly going to the pharmacies, it helped to be able to test more. We know according to the data that we have from Abrapharma, we have more than 17 million tests that were done in pharmacies. This measure of broadening the places to test besides the clinical labs, it's part of an old discussion in Anvisa. It was part of the public consultation. This public consultation received several contributions, and quite soon it was approved by the board, a public hearing to see how to broaden the testing to other places besides labs and keeping quality. I think this is fundamental. And the third moment, that was the last one, happened from something that we got from the Ministry of Health, according to PNA test, bringing the self-test as part of the public policy for the country. From that moment on, Anvisa worked in regulations in a fast way and approved in January a regulation that allowed to use the self-test. Now we have 21 self-tests that has the certification from Anvisa, this data of what we're talking about. United States has 14 approved tests. They have started this before us, and we started later, but we have more tests approved. Besides that, personally, I see that the policy is not complete. The tests, they came to the pharmacies, but now, yesterday I went to a pharmacy and I saw the self-test. The cost was 60 reais for the person to buy that.
In Europe, we see that they have an average of €3 in the United States, $2 to $5. So what justifies a product that is so much more expensive than in the rest of the world? I think we still need to reach the goal for self-tests to be more accessible to everyone. If they're not given for free by the public health system, they need to have a price range that is appropriate for our population. So those are the three main points. I think the self-test also opens room for a discussion of self-tests for other diseases as well. This is very present in the review that we did in Anvisa, which was the public consultation 714. And there is already an awareness of broadening the possibilities of self-test. This regulation already has the public consultation evaluation, and we are waiting for deliberation from the Anvisa Collegiate Board. Those are the main points that I would like to bring today for this debate. Thank you, Dr. Vecina. Thank you so much, and let's move on. Thank you so much, Leandro. Anvisa's position is very brave, especially in this advance that we can see, understanding that in specific circumstances, like what we are living now, this is an exceptional moment at the moment. We need to use the knowledge that is generated by the other agencies. It's clear that in a specific moment, we're going to have to think this through, because the most appropriate way in the measures that we are talking about for economic activities is creating an equivalent agreement. But anyways, I really congratulate the agency's view, even though it's obvious, like you said, it's obvious that we need to have a public policy, and the agency is responsible for regulation and not production of public policies. So I believe the behavior was very correct. Thank you so much. Let's continue with the debate. Now we go over to the industry view. We're going to listen to Dr. Fabio Arcuri. He is representing CBDL. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I hope you're doing well, Professor Vecina. Hello, everyone else on our panel. Good morning. Carlos, thank you so much for the invitation. Here, I would like to do a very quick overview because I want to leave enough time for common questions and discussions at the end. Anyway, from the industry point of view, the industry believes that any diagnostic way, which is lab or in pharmacies or self-tests, we think that they are all valid and they can be complementary many times. I think that the only thing we need to add, or the only thing I would add to what Leandro just said about the quality of the tests is that we can't forget the role of the physician in COVID or any other sickness, any other pathology. So here we have Sergio, who is going to give us the pharmacy view. And my goal is, I don't want to be controversial today, but we know that the patient often seeks the drugstore and sometimes the drugstore more than the health center because of lines and everything. And in the pharmacy, they currently, actually, it's been a while, pharmacies have the pharmacy assistants. So this situation was solved. I can say this with certainty because I'm work with pharmacy myself. I graduated at the end of the 80s. So there is an important point that we shouldn't take for granted about access. With what Leandro said, well, I'm very sick today. I have a cold, and I went to the drugstore to buy a test, and it cost me 70 reais. Okay, I paid for it. Thankfully, it was negative for COVID. I was just confirming this point. So CBDL, together with other groups, had an initiative which I think was probably unique in the world. At least it was a pioneer, creating a COVID validation group. This group involves the industry, the academy, and the labs. So the biggest labs that we have in Brazil, the industries and the academy together. The academy put together a validation protocol, and the COVID tests were, well, as they were coming in, they were being validated. This validation was not official, but it did give us this information. So I think learning is important. This is an important learning process for the future. I'm not only focusing on COVID, but sicknesses as a whole, on the other communicable diseases as well. So it's important that we have a schedule alignment, an agenda alignment, just like we had with Anvisa, Abramed, SBPC, which is the Clinical Pathology Association in Brazil. We had an important alignment with other agencies so that everything could go in one sense and towards one goal. Another thing that is very important, the industry, together with the whole sector, with the entire health chain, they need to have indirect action guided towards health, but direct towards the health chain, like logistic points, for example. Currently, this is just an example. Currently, or Brazil, or at least the state of São Paulo, has a lack of dry ice. So for those products that need to be frozen, that need to be transported at a temperature which is below zero, we're having issues. A lot of companies, a lot of CBDL companies are having the same issue. This is just an example. It's not applicable to the COVID products at the moment, but in any way, it's an example that I bring about other factors that are really important and are essential in the healthcare chain so that the test can actually reach the final user, whether it's labs, whether it's pharmacies, whether it's the actual patient. Of course, the only person who benefits from this story is the patient and the doctor-patient relationship. But this is very important. And this is my last point. I think we should work together with other players in the sector to be able to make sure we have sustainability in the sector. Just now, I was listening to some news about an entity on the health sector that is seeking a meeting with the health ministry to have price alignments for SUS and everything else. So apparently inside the health sector, especially the supplementary health sector, there is a serious problem of financial equation. And this problem has gotten more and more serious. So this is getting even more serious because the COVID part that we are facing, the world is actually facing a war. And just so I don't go into it, this increased flight prices, fuel prices, inflation is off the charts. And inside the system, we don't see any conditions to make this more balanced. So I think it's important that we understand the barriers, how the sector behaves financially, what are the fiscal alternatives that we have. For example, going back to the 70 reais price, which is the self-test, which is over 10 euros. Why is this so expensive? Why is it so expensive? Is it an import cost? Is the logistic cost too high? How can we improve this? Our infrastructure, is it appropriate? So all these questions should be asked with depth. They should be asked to different sectors of society, to different sectors of the health chain, so that we can find solutions that will make it feasible for the sector to survive with better financial health and for the patient to have appropriate access to testing. So just to stress this, Professor, CBDL and the industries see the self-test as an important tool together with other tools in facing COVID. And when it becomes an endemic, I can't define if it's already an endemic situation or not. I don't know if it's still a pandemic, but even when it's endemic, even when we get to that point, self-test, pharmacy test, professional test done in the pharmacy, the lab, they are complementary and they should be considered always considering the clinical quality of the test results, but it's also important the transportation chain and everything else. So that's what I wanted to discuss today. Thank you so much, Fabio. What you said was very interesting, and I can have two conclusions. The first conclusion is that what is good should be used. What is good for who? Well, for the final client. So self-test increases access for the population of a important non-pharmaceutical measure, and now it needs to be included in public policies, as we already mentioned by the people who came before you. There is a result, which is the individual result, so my test, but amidst an epidemic that we are living and we're still living at the moment, in an epidemic, it's important that this data is collectively worked on. So there is a lack of a public policy that works with this data, that uses this data collectively. The second thing that you mentioned is the topic of the next meeting that Carlos is going to call for CBDL. So what to do with the economic financial impacts for this crisis that we are currently going through? Not only about the tests, but also about everything related to the sector itself, the lab sector itself, for products and for this field where CBDL works. And also, we are going to listen to the lab view from Fábio Brezão. He is the representative of SBPC and laboratory medicine. Please, Fábio, go ahead. Hello, Dr. Vecina. It's a pleasure to be here with you today in this panel. I would like to say hello to all my colleagues in the panel, and I also appreciate the invitation from CBDL to be a part of this event. Talking a little bit about our labs, I can say everyone will remember that ever since the beginning of the pandemic, it was very difficult for the clinical labs for us to have tests for COVID. The beginning of the pandemic, the labs had to go after personal protection equipment, trying to find different ways of bringing value to the population, to the community, scientific community, to doctors, to find quick and precise diagnostics. As we said in 2020, together with other scientific societies being supported by many labs in Brazil, we had a program to evaluate the kits. Even though Anvisa did a great job with authorization, the registration of kits would come to Brazil, and we did this work to evaluate the kits where we would test sensibility of the test. And on the clinical lab, we need to comply with our RDC. And they are very strict with the tests. And we need to evaluate sensibility, flexibility, but we need to participate in the external quality control, proficiency. You need to do an internal quality control in the lab. And at first we had rapid antibody test. And then after that, we had the PCR, which will get the genetic material of the virus, still the golden standard to diagnose the disease. Then we had the antigen test, which is also useful. We went through serologies and reactions, so we didn't have the vaccine at the time. And at some point, the doctor and the population ended up asking for antibodies, IgG, to see if the patient had COVID or not. And I would say that myself as a pathologist, I would stay on the phone for hours trying to explain the goal of an IgG or IgM serology, IgA, which one was better, if it was important to do it. So it was a lot of work during the pandemic for us to be able to, well, I want to congratulate all health workers, but also the clinical pathologists in labs that were trying to say,
That's our work, and we are learning with the scientific community. We've been through a moment that we need to have a number of procedures from a WHO, so the agencies and visa were quite important when the patient, where the population could take the tests by their own healthcare system. This was an important step. Other tests and labs, we collaborated so we could do this in an ethical way to be included in the procedures. We had an influenza pandemic, A and B, so we had the tests for influenza, antigen test, SPCR, and influenza, other virus, and a lot of test labs were included in this and helped in the diagnosis in a therapeutic behavior that was suitable by the physician. So the lab had this big role. And I can say that one of the labs that provide the tests for COVID, besides being able to do the tests, there's a frequent fiscalization. We have a monitoring for them. We have inspection for this. So we have this function for the labs from the states. So each lab from the states are monitored. So last, we had the authorization to have the self-test. What do you think about the self-test? We think that's a tool with a high potential that's really helpful at the moment of the pandemic, where you can provide power for the patient, but obviously the patient needs to be careful. Why? Because COVID, even though we've been going through this for 2 years, for some people, depending on the level of education of the person, they need to have the knowledge. They need to learn how to do the test, an antigen test in the lab, where you get from the nasopharyngeal. So this self-test, you have a nasal use. So we see how important is, as Dr. Gonzalo mentioned, the public policies. So to notify the test, so you give a view about the epidemiological point of view of that. So we thought that's important. The self-test have a way as the population to record the results, so we can have this knowledge. The self-test is a triage test. This is in the resolution of the clearing this test. And in some cases that they need to be reassessed. We have the RT-PCR, the gold standard test for the diagnosis of the disease. So this part of the notification of the test, we think that's quite relevant to continue with this study. So in the future, we can have a way of having a knowledge about the disease itself. And our scientific society is available for the population, for the government. We've been working a lot with the industry in assessing all these tests to provide the best for the population. I think I'll stop here. So keep for the final debate so we can continue discussing this important topic. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Fábio Brazão. I think that we need to mention the importance of the lab tests in this crisis, because in the beginning, there was a lot of issues. No one knew why we would use the tests. So we need to look at that and remember, we didn't know what was a serology test. We didn't know what was a molecular test in the beginning of this crisis. So there were a lot of mistakes. So it's not thinking what we have done, but we cannot forget what we didn't do. As a great measure, it was quite important, the professional, the physicians, the pharmacists, they were the leaders of this project, of understanding what we were looking at and what we were seeing. So I think that was important, and also important to recognize, even though we had the problems regarding the market, to consider the self-tests and the limitations of the self-test. So now I greet Dr. Fábio for what he mentioned and regarding the organizations that he's representing. And now let's see the view of the drugstores, of the pharmacies. That's something that's transforming. I think that everyone that are here, the pharmacy that's going through a stronger change, especially with this pandemic. And for that, we'll hear we'll hear Sergio Mena Barreto, that's the director from Abrafarma. So please, Sergio. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I was listening to other speakers, so thank you, Professor Gonzalo Vencina. It's a pleasure to see you after a while. And let's talk a little bit about quick tests, self-test, and the role of the drugstore. The pharmacy is going through a huge transformation moment, And we have a satisfaction of what this is becoming. So it's a positive transformation that comes to provide what the Brazilian society needs. And we are really glad to do that. So to talk about what Zabra Pharma is, an entity that has the 26 biggest drugstores in the country. We have 9,000 drugstores, but this 9,000 is almost half of everything that is sold in Brazilian market. So 45% of the market. So almost 70 billion in sales up to February of 2022, more than 960 million care service, as Brazil went 4 times in our for 9,000 drugstores. And even though Brazil has 86,000 drugstores, with 10% of them, we have almost half of the market. I think that the great discussion here, and what I bring to you, Dr. Gonzalo mentioned this, it is the transformation that the pharmacy is going through in Brazil, and this pandemic showed this transformation. We named this as a silent revolution. Since the approval of the law in 2014, we were trying to qualify 26,000 pharmacists that we have. We tried to create rooms and get from the Brazilian society and from Anvisa a regulation. And then we had the pandemic, and the pandemic showed that more than 25,000 certifications, online programs. So this change in the profession that we have, then we had the pandemic, and it showed that the idea was right. So the pharmacy is going through this moment in the Brazilian society that's changing the use of this place. A small example for 1 minute that we had something in the TV. So I'd like to show this about the tests in the drugstores. In the last days, people were trying to get the tests, and it increased a lot in the drugstores in Brazil. So we have and also the positive results. To take the fast test to check if it's COVID or not is not the easy task. In great drugstores in São Paulo City, the majority of the time, you need to wait 24 hours for an opening to have an hour. I tried to get a test in a drugstore that are the faster ones. It was not available. We have 89,000 tests being sold per week. So if we have 130,000 tests that people are looking for the tests, you have more. So we need to rethink about our stocks and the offering of the product. It is what's happening. According to the Brazilian Association of the Drugstores, the number of fast tests done in the second part of December increased in 50% comparing to the first time, the first period. And we have more positive tests. So we had less in the beginning of the month, in the middle, almost 7%, and yesterday it got 26% to Brazil. Brazil is a country that doesn't test the population that much. Our neighbors in South America, they test twice or even 5 times more. And it's only testing that we can isolate the ones that are infected in a faster way. So this we're talking about 150,000 tests per week. We had achieved 750,000 tests per week. And with the positive results, we're around 48%. So since Visa approved the fast tests, and drugstores, we almost achieved 17 million tests with a rate positive amount about 23% in the last week. After 8 weeks dropping, we had an increase in this curve of this is the curve of the pandemic. Since we have created this, the positive rate is around 15%. And yes, Brazil went to the drugstore to get tested. It was the place that tested the population during the pandemic. And now we go to the self-test. And I'm proud to mention here, I think that Carlos have mentioned, but we are launching today. So we are using this date to launch the site meuautoteste.com.br. That's an effort from Agropharmacy CBDL. So to explain to population, to bring more information to the population, to publish consolidated results that population will report to the manufacturers. We show the first panel of results that we have. And I think that the great thing here is to have the common citizen to have a partnership with the society, having self-responsibility, self-care, taking care of the people that are close to them, and the self-test allows that. So you have a simple instrument that you can take to your house, and you, of course, being careful. That's why the idea of having this website to clarify, to explain. Our pharmacists are also providing instructions in the drugstores, so people can still being taken care of and being responsible. The first results are, we have a huge impact, because if you have an average rate of 16%, the average in Brazil, of course, this is a small panel. We have 25,000 users that reported for the manufacturers. So we have a positive rate in the self-test of 79%. So it means that probably the person buys the self-test, goes home because it has some symptoms, or probably tested positive before, and it's going to see when it's going to leave that crisis and takes the self-test to check, or has the symptoms and wants to be sure if or if it's a flu or not. This not now that the person had the symptoms, buys the self-test. This is the current data. So we expect to provide information for the society.
I constantly hear $5. Oh, in the United States, self-test is $5. Guys, less than 3 weeks ago, I was in the US and the self-test is between $12 and $15 in the US per test. So I don't know where people saw $5, but this is a real picture of a store, Walgreens or and a CVS, $23.99. I don't want to discuss the manufacturer. It goes from $23.99 to $29.99. In Brazil, we do have taxes. And of course, it is a big challenge for us to reduce this price. If we can find a way to reduce the price, that's great. But here we have ICMS, we have a lot of taxes. So it's really costly for this product to reach the shelves. The pharmacy is going through transformations, and we started this in 2014 with the approval of Law 13021. This journey continues. It's a real obstacle race. We still hope that this year we have been talking to Anvisa, and probably this discussion of 911, 912, both public consultations, RDC 44, 302, and 15, they will be in public debate over the next couple of weeks. And I believe that this also brings to the population a lot of new possibilities. And the pharmacy cannot be ignored. You can't ignore the importance of the pharmacy. We have 86,000 pharmacies, maybe 20,000 pharmacies can offer a totally different service for the population. Us, in our 9,000 pharmacies, we have 6,000 pharmaceutical services rooms, and this is a very silent revolution. If pharmacy can help improve the Brazilian health using rapid tests as a way of triage, for example, working on prevention. We already have an RDC from Anvisa allowing immunization and monitoring and helping the patients so that they can improve, because we know that abandonment in Brazil is around 54%. We have a lot of studies showing that. And it's in the pharmacy where we're going to actually help what usually happens with the patients after 6 months when they start treatment. Usually people leave the treatment after 6 months. Ever since Law 13021 was approved, this is the reality. We transformed out of our 8,900 pharmacies, 6,000 have pharmaceutical rooms. These are real pharmaceuticals supporting real customers in a lot of Brazilian cities, helping monitor and change health. The truth is that the journey of the chronic patient is not easy. And any instrument, any element that we can add to this game to try to make access easier, to try to make them more aware in the happy scenario, the happy day scenario for the patient, Brazil will win and health will be much better over the next couple of years. What are our next challenges? First of all, more services. As I mentioned, Anvisa has the regulatory review. On our side, having a curatorship, offering options, making sure that all products are registered and have high quality, and for them to follow the price that's the most accessible. We need to find ways to reduce the price. I agree. Talking to people, increasing this awareness, adhering to treatment to avoid any difficulty they may have in the journey. So it's a world going more towards high tech, but pharmacies can also offer high touch. So this human side of helping, which is something we do very well. Over the pandemic, we were called to help women who are victims of violence. We were really happy to do that. And we believe that this is the place to really do this. This is where people belong. This is where we can be closer, we can help and access and increase Brazilian health. So that's what I would like to tell you today. Let me try to stop sharing. My mouse is not here. Okay, someone help me. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to finish Dr. Gonzalo Vecino, just 30 seconds. We have one pharmacist in one of our networks called Araújo. Her drugstore is right next to a gas station. And every day there are dozens of truckers who want to purchase Viagra. Many times they don't purchase condoms with the Viagra. And she has a very interesting knowledge. She put a room inside the drugstore and she asks him, have you ever had an HIV test? Have you ever had a syphilis test? And they usually do it, something that probably they would never do it. They would never go to the health unit and say, hey, I would like to have a syphilis test, but she's able to convince them. And she has been identifying dozens and dozens of syphilis and HIV and sends them to the public health. And she gets testimonies actually from the doctors from the public health clinic, and with this action that she does. This is very important. I think it's priceless to use a structure that is all over Brazil to help win these obstacles that we're still facing today in our country. Thank you so much. That's what I would like to say. Now going back to Dr. Gonzalo Vecino. Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you, Sergio. I think it's not a new pharmacy in the evolutionary sense. Pharmacies have always been very important communitary institutions in Brazil. And what we see now is the pharmacy is getting adapted to the digital age. So I think this transformation is very important. What we can't lose sight of, Sergio, and everyone here and all of our assistants here, is that the pharmacy is one of the health establishments that exists. So it can't take over for services of clinical pathology, because clinical pathology services have to keep existing, because there are things that can only be done in a lab. And just like that, it can't, there are no doctors in the pharmacy. There are great pharmacists that can provide excellent services towards society, but there is a limit in what pharmacists can do. So we need to be able to build a healthcare system where the several agencies can contribute the best way possible so that the Brazilian population can have the best health care. So I think it was very interesting to see the pharmacy evolution. And I think that self-test is a part of this set of transformations that we are living now. A question to our panelists. Would you like to complement at all? Because thanks to the fact that everyone did really well time-wise, we have some extra time. And Carlos can also be a part of this group if he wants to maybe give us an external opinion.
Perfeito. Me escutam?
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate, I would like to thank all panelists for CBDL, Aladiv. It's an honor to have so many opinions that are complementing each other, and the main focus is on the patient. What we see, Dr. Gonzalo, is specifically this great effort to create something that will be able to change the health scenario. And I think that among issues that we've had, we have a positive result. And it shows that together we can do much more than individually.
Acho que esse é o maior legado.
This is the biggest legacy from the pandemic, in my opinion, this special outlook. So I'm sure we are going through many changes at the moment. The patient journey depends on these efforts, whether it's from the regulatory point of view, whether it's from the creation and preparation of new environments, whether it's production and development of products that are more and more, that have higher efficacy, and also the health professionals that are enabled and are able to give this attention, just like we've been seeing. So I think this is a path with no return. We're going to have changes, we're going to have participation, and with a higher spirit, much more than just a corporate view, because we may have had that in the past. Today, it's important to look at the future. And your question also on the ministry to Dr. Camille, for example, what is the importance of the ministry about self-test? Actually, I have no questions to say that the self-test vision is something important, fundamental, that will complement other actions. How it works, for example, brilliantly today on the HIV self-test. I think this is the best example. And it can be the same with COVID. If maybe because of budget or policies, it will eventually, we won't eventually have a more concrete action. It doesn't mean that we don't have this perception. And this is very important, specifically for the other actions that we have. We heard Dr. Sergio Carmona talk about what has been done in terms of hepatitis C, which is our next goal. So I think it's important to have this view. And I feel very calm to know that everyone is looking at the patient. So now back to you, Dr. Gonzalo. Great, Carlos. Thank you so much. I think you were able to summarize the positions very well. Obviously, we have a lot to perfect and a lot to improve. We have a long way to go. I believe self-test is taking an important space. I believe all the players here, the public player, the regulation, the industry representative, the pharmacies representatives, the lab representatives, gave a very important contribution for this new moment that we are going through. Obviously, as we said, the data that Sergio brought about the test positivity over the past couple of days, we had a slight growth in how many people are testing positive. And this is a guidelines with what's happening with COVID in Brazil. So unfortunately, the pandemic is not over. I do think we have a positive perspective, but we are still in a pandemic for sure. All we can do is try to see how the next few days are going to go. I will ask again if any of our participants would like to have any final words. Go ahead, Fabio. Hello, everyone. No, actually, I have to go now, so I would like to thank Carlos for the invitation. I would like to thank you for being the mediator and thanking everyone in the event, thanking Fabio, my namesake, Sergio, Leandro. Thank you for the participation and our colleague from the health ministry as well. I believe it was an interesting event. And it's clear to me that the challenges will remain, but now we know a little bit more. We know more about what we have, our limits, the problems that we have, the problems we're facing, and we will still face. Brazil as a country and in terms of infrastructure, there's a lot to improve. There's still a lot to be done, and we are here for that. All of us are part of different sectors, and together we can bring something better to society in the present and in the future as well. So again, thank you so much. And I apologize, but I really have to go. I have to go. Okay, thank you, Fabio.
Someone else? Fabio, open your mic. Yes, just to thank the opportunity, to thank you, Dr. Gonzalo. It was a pleasure to see you, even it's virtually, to see all the colleagues. And as soon that we can meet in person, as Dr. Gonzalo mentioned, the pandemic isn't over. So we should be careful the same way to try to take the test when it's necessary in the right place, in the right moment. And to say that the clinical labs from the country are available with different lab tests, not only for the diagnosis of the disease, of the COVID itself, RT-PCR, that's the gold standard test, but other tests that we see a lot of patients with some issues going through medical treatment. In our society, our medicine, we need to be aware of how we use the lab tests. So just leave this message here, and we are available for the population and the scientific community. Thank you, Fabio. Leandro, Sergio. I would like to thank you again for inviting me to the discussion. I think that the message here that I try to leave is about the engaging of everyone. Each one has an important role and one complements the other. So we have the engagement of the private and the public sector. I think this is the path to have a dialogue. This is the path to try to find solutions for our country. So I'd like to thank you all. And if we need, I'm here available so we can move forward in different topics. Thank you. Thank you very much, Leandro, and congratulations for your participation and for Anvisa's participation in this crisis. Sergio, so thank you, Carlos, for inviting me, and it was a pleasure to be here with you. You can count on Abrafarma in the discussions, what we can contribute as we move forward to help the country. We are here. So thank you, Dr. Gonzalo Vicina. It was a pleasure to see you again. And we need to have debates, we need to discuss. Using the different views, we can move forward. we can bring improvements to our country and for the final user, what's quite important. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sergio. Dr. Carolina. Dr. Carolina, she apologized, but she needed to go talk to the ministry. They called me to tell that, and she apologized. She thanked you. She said that was a great discussion, and she's available later to support us. And I thank her on behalf of our organization to thank the Ministry of Health and CONAS that was supposed to be here, but was not possible. But it is also a great partner. I would like to say that it was a pleasure to participate of this session, to highlight the challenges that we have ahead of us, not only regarding this crisis, but the next ones that probably we will go through. Unfortunately, we have this disease and we have the virus and they like us, so there's no way out. We need to learn how to manage this crisis in a better way. And one of the ways of doing this is talking. So let's exercise the empathy to see ourselves on the other people's shoes and find the best alternatives for society. That's our final goal. Carlos, congratulations for CBDL, for everything that you've been doing during this crisis. It was a pleasure to be here with you. I thank you, Dr. Gonzalo. I thank all the colleagues, not only for being here for the participation, but especially with the current ideas that you give and the roles that you've been doing personally and professionally in the institutions that you work with. Thank you very much, and I wait for you in the next sessions. So we have the final part, the final conclusions. I would like to invite Dr. Rosana Peeling to speak.
Thank you, Carlos. It's always such a pleasure for me to join you in hosting these meetings, because there's always a multi-sectoral interaction and then collaboration, sort of paving the way for sort of new ways of doing things to increase access, to accelerate access. So these really has been very rich discussions, from the new role that pharmacies, the over 80,000 pharmacies, think of the power that they have to help us with access. And think of empowerment through use of self-tests, not only for HIV and COVID, but for now a host of other diseases and conditions. And there's, starting from the very beginning of the pandemic, when Carlos said to me that there are all these societies that are willing to come together and labs to come together to evaluate the hundreds of tests that we have available. And so that's been such a really valuable experience and lots of lessons learned. And I like to think that as we now process to doing, gradually having new ways to do things, I like to think of a new public health order, where public health doesn't mean that we tell the public what to do, but that the public together with us actually all chip in together to find our way out of pandemics, to find our way out of antimicrobial resistance, and to fight, all the other things that is so important in global health in terms of access to diagnostics. So thank you, Carlos, for involving us in yet another really, really good discussion about the legacy of what's been set up for the pandemic, Act 8, and all the things that have happened in terms of self-tests and getting us thinking about how do we use all these lessons learned for the next pandemic and other issues in global health. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosana. Thank you. Rosana, foi excelente, agradecemos sua
Rosana was
participação.
great. We'd like to thank you for participation. We thank everyone that were involved, and it's important to remember that this legacy, it needs to be documented, so it serves as a base for the future. In this sense, what Dr. Rosana mentioned, and Fábio Arcuri and Fábio Brazão, this project of assessment of Corona kids, we're going to have the first study published with more than 6,000 samples that were tested from Brazilian patients regarding the tests that came to the market. We also have all this content that was generated in the different seminars that are also available on Aladip website or CBDL website and IDC, the International Diagnostic Center. So we have the presentations, we are going to have the links, and everyone can review and use the content to build the new health order mentioned. Also, with that, we have Professor Gonzalo, that's the professor from the public health in USP. He was the secretary of health in the municipality. I mentioned wrong at the beginning, but he was the first president from the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency. So not only universities, for example, the USP University and Fiocruz, and Claudio presented to us his considerations in the previous seminar, and he's also working hard to promote this new order. So I invite you all for the next journeys, the next events, but also to work towards our citizen, our patient, to the person that's there, that's the one that needs being taken care of in a growing process, that the person can be engaged and being part of this self-care and trying to change the disease and going to a prevention and to promote health. So thank you all. I apologize for we had a small delay, but I think that was quite important to have this discussion. Thank you all.
Thank
See
you.
you next time.
Okay, bye.